Good afternoon, everybody. In the spirit of Dick Dixon, who I think began all of this years ago, you betcha. Great time today. This is a wonderful gathering. As you know, it kind of started off years ago with Danny and Nick and the old timers. Then we had some younger people in. Who were a little offended by the old timer phrase, so we switched it up to broadcast legends. We've had a few complaints this year that there are only a few true broadcast legends, and we shouldn't use that term. To which Danny and I responded, if you're in broadcasting, everyone in this room is a legend in their own mind. This has really grown, and it's great to see everyone and renew acquaintances. There are a few people who can't be here. Sorry, I'm in Toronto, says the mayor, Pete Kennedy. Merry Christmas to all, Happy New Year. And Danny, feel free to enjoy his peanut butter and jelly sandwich that he always tries to get. Regretfully, I won't be here. I was hoping to come, but have a conflict I can't resolve. This is from Jay Philippone. And thanks for the reminder. Sorry, can't make it this year. Melinda Rosenblum Goldberg. Jack Lovino sends his regards, having some medical challenges, hopes to get back. Eddie Music has had some eye surgery, and he's still recovering from that. He has been here every year since this all began. So we keep all of those who can't be here in our thoughts today. As you know from all the communications, I am really the secretary of this organization. The president and chairman emeritus who has kept this together all the years is Danny Guilfoyle. And I turn it over to him. So if you know of anyone who you want to follow along, you can go to youtube.com/alhart13. And if you have any moments, just go over to that camera there with the red light, say hello. We do have 4 or 5 people that couldn't be here that are watching the event, so watch your language.
Well, I'll tell you the truth about Eddie Musicus and Jack. They both didn't like the bump in price on the tickets. And so one made up an excuse that he was at the doctor's and the other one at the dentist or eye surgery or something. So that's the truth about them. Well, I'm thinking about it. We've lost some people this year. And, you know, it's sad to think about it because they've been so much a part of our lives, but Nancy Calisorinos of the Broadway Theater League, we lost her a few months ago, such a sweet lady. Frank Contestable of Frontier Communications and Contestable, way too young, and just recently Brad, and I think you're going to talk a little about him. Okay, we lost another member. Do you know anybody else who we lost this year? Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear it. So, wait a minute. You're not old enough to be here.
I snuck in.
Channel 8?
Yes.
Yeah? Can you stand up for a second and say hi?
Teresa.
Hey, Teresa. With News 8, and I'm so thankful that Janet told me about this and allowed me to come in and sit and dine with you legends.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it. Now, don't listen to the guys next to you. Those 2 guys, they'll tell you stories. But anyway, take what you get as a grain of salt. You can take what you believe and what you don't believe. What else? What kind of housekeeping things we need to do? We decided to have Joe this year, Joe Lomonaco, speak at 1 o'clock because it's the 100th anniversary of WHAM, which may not sound like much to you, but that was one of the first in the country. KDKAA, I think, was first, and you know, Wim was shortly behind. George Eastman was one of the founders and said that we need something with impact, and he said, wham! And, you know, Batman took that to the comics and used it all the time. But anyway, that's great. Now, some of you guys may still have a little bit of an ego. And so there are two people here who might be able to use you on their shows. Joanna Palvino has a show for seniors on Wham that's doing very well, and she's always looking for personalities. And you know, you can lie on the air, nobody's going to know. You can have some fun with that. You know, Joanna, I don't know, maybe you've had her already, but Beverly must have some stories to tell about Dick Tobias. The times they were together on the air were quite amazing. And also, Don Geneva over there is always looking for people to come on his show as well. So here's if your ego is still up there, go ahead and talk to these people and have some fun. Anyway, I think it's time to eat. Yes? Are you going to ask for which table first?
Katie will do that.
All right. And Don, do you want to say something?
No, Katie's going to appoint the table, so we will proceed with that and back with the program shortly.
All right, and obey the rules. She's the boss now.
I love it. So you have a choice then to make. Mary, I want to say hello to everybody. Who's ever out there? Greetings.
How are you? Stick with us. We're going to eat.
I want to listen to 60 music. That's what I go to. I don't care when you go to. Yeah, I would.
Are you finished attacking the cookie table? We had quite a stampede there. While we're thinking of it, another person who passed away this past year who did so many things for our business is Tom George. And I know some of you have been talking about Tom, but Tom was a great guy. Barry's competition, Tom George, yes. Of course, Barry has 14 jobs. Tom only had 3.
I have the most call letters too.
Okay, time for our featured speaker, and the perfect time this year is the 100th anniversary of WHAM, which is just quite amazing, and it's good that we're part of that group of stations that was there in the early days. And this guy that I'm going to introduce you to came into the production department, what we call it? Yeah, production. We had some zany ones. We had a guy named Dave Roberts who was so crazy he had to take a day off about once a month and expanded it to 3 days before he'd come back to work. He needed time for his brain to stop frying. And then we had George and John, who you can still hear on 13th, doing some of the bumpers and so forth. Georgianne was with us for a while, and then came this skinny kid who looked like the guy from Toy Story. And, you know, I didn't know if he was trying to impress us with his diction, because it sounded forced, except that's Joe. That's what he speaks like. And he's been with us how many years now?
28.
28 years. I say us, I've been lost for a while. That's great, 28 years. How many years for you, Jim Salmon?
Saturday will be 34.
34 years, Jim Salmon. That's great. Anybody else here been with the station longer? No, that's Pretty good. Yes, over here, Johnny. Oh, 1982.
40 years at this bank.
Holy smokes! Who hired you? I did. I did. I figured if I don't hire this kid, the boss is going to kill me. So he's been there ever since, Johnny Palvino. Anyway, Joe Lomonaco, let's bring him up. Thunderous applause.
And of course, I can talk for a living, but getting a computer to mind my manners. Hang on. What's your password, Joe?
Oh, yeah. With a capital P.
There we go. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad that I grew up enough to be invited to this clam bake, so thank you very much for that. Been watching this thing happen for a long time, and there is no place I'd rather be, quite honestly, than hanging out with people I've listened to, I have worked with, my colleagues, my mentors, my peers. So it is great to be here with you today, and thank you very much for inviting me to share a little bit of what I've been up to for the last 2 years, which is trying as hard as I can to document the people and the stories and the sounds that have made up this radio station for the last 100 years. And I definitely want to start right off the top by thanking Scott Feibush, who is here for providing a lot of information for me and for really being a resource within the community. So, wanted to do a podcast. Wanted to, because we've done 70th, well actually it started with a 50th anniversary show, a sample of which you can find in the podcast feed, with Bill Gibbons and Walter Dixon doing the hosting. It was a 2.5-hour show leading up to the Opinion program hosted by Tom Badger, who was over here. Tom hosted the show that night with Bill. A documentary in sound is what it started out with. We did one for our 70th anniversary, our 75th, and our 80th. I don't know whether we did a show for the 90th or not, but what I wanted to do was something that was bigger than a show. Something that was going to give time to share stories, to hear sounds of not only where we were, but where we are. So, thanks to Scott, a little bit of history. July 11th, 1922, WHAM signs on the air at 8:33 on the dial. That's where it all started, and with a power of 100 watts. Big time. In 1927, WHAM is sold to the Stromberg Carlson Company. The transmitter moved out to Victor, initially, with a power of 5,000 watts. And the studios moved from their original home in the Eastman Theater to the Sagamore Hotel, 111 East Avenue. The tower still stands there. In 1928, WHAM moved its frequency to 1150 on the dial. That's where that started. In 1933, we increased our power from 25 to 50,000 watts. FM came in with WHFM in 1939. We moved to 1180 on the dial in March of 1941. In 1948, after 2 years of planning and development, Rochester Radio City opened. A technological marvel of its time, quite honestly, as you can see from what is involved with studio spaces, the giant auditorium, which could seat almost 370 people with a full stage. Took 2 years to build. Then some TV interlopers moved in and decided to take it over. But it's interesting. 1948, this building is fully operational and open. Now we can look back at it with some hindsight. Think of what happened to radio in the latter part of the 1940s and into the 1950s. As the medium changes, as television comes in, as regular programming, long-form programming, game shows, daytime shows start to go away, and the advent of the personality jock in the 50s and the music-intensive format. Think about what WHAM would be like today if we still occupied all that space. It was gigantic. And what they were thinking about at the time when they actually built the thing, to think, oh, they probably had a vision that radio as it existed in the 1940s was going to continue on for many, many years. The television would never take it over, that other forms of entertainment would come in, and we would still need to have all this space. But in 1949, WHAM TV on Channel 6 signed on the air. That proposed television studio. I don't think that was ever built. Now, was that ever built? No. They proposed the TV studio off the bat, but that never came to fruition. Nope. In 1956, WHAM was sold to an organization called Riggs and Green. WHAM-TV became WROC under the new owners in '56. 3 years later, in '59, WHAM is bought by a company called the Genesee Broadcasting Company. A few years later, in '62, WHAM would move out of Rochester Radio City to 350 East Avenue, and the Rust family, Rust Broadcasting, would come in. And from there, it would be 1995, when Jack Pelvino would form the Lincoln Group. Don't make me sign in again, you stinking thing. There we go. When WHAM would be sold to the Lincoln Group, Jack Pelvino and Bud Wertheimer, Arnie Rothschild, Ed Musicus would come in and be our local owners. And not only be our local owners, but really start to leave their imprint on the radio industry. They would create a culture, not only on the air, but behind the scenes in the sales department that would be emulated and copied and looked to as a model outside of Rochester throughout the entire radio business. And then, of course, in 1997, I believe, because I have a lot of dates in my head, and not all of them are 100% correct, is when the Wild Wild West of corporate radio started to come in. Jack and Bud and the local ownership team, the Lincoln Group, decided to step aside, sell out to a variety of national owners, including CBS Radio, AM/FM, J-Core, Clear Channel, and eventually iHeartMedia, which we have here today. So we've come a long way. We've had a lot of owners. We've had a lot of stories and a lot of people over the years, and many of you are in this room here today that have been a part of WHAM's history. So what I wanted to do here is, of course, the series is available on demand on the iHeartRadio app. There are 100 episodes right now. There will be about 103 by the time we're done. Our final episode will post on December 28th. And we have a few more things to do. So what I wanted to do here is I just wanted to share a couple of things. When I think about the series, and I think about the stories that I've collected, these are the ones that sort of come to mind. One of the first interviews that I did for the series was with Tom Badger. I had never met Tom before, but I had seen photos of him from some of our older anniversary shows, and I didn't exactly know what his role was at the radio station, nor did I know, and what I was curious with almost everyone I talked to was the path. What was it about what you heard that said, I want to do this for a living? I need to be here and inside. So, Tom told me his story.
Working one day on the road, I wandered into Wham, which was at 350.
Nope, knows if you can hear it.
Well, who shows up?
Let's start that again.
After working one day on the road, I wandered into Wham, which was at 350 East Avenue, and said, I'd like to talk to somebody. Well, who shows up but the news director at that time, Dick Tobias. So we got to chatting. He was very kind, and through the years I got to know him extremely well. But I started going into WHAM in the afternoons after my work schedule, wherever it was, and kind of practice on a little bit with a microphone, but mostly in rewriting stories and writing stories and that sort of thing. And that's how it all began.
He walked in and said, I'd like to work in radio, please. That was it. That was what it took. He listened to the radio, heard WHAM, and decided that that is where he wanted to be. And Dick Tobias, that's a story I'd never heard about Dick. When I heard stories about Dick, I heard a certain type of a story, a certain personality of a story, and I said, that doesn't line up. That doesn't quite line up with the person that I've heard about, only tangentially. So I was grateful to get that story, because it was not only a great story from Tom about how he started the business, and it was a 20-plus year career at WHAM that started just by walking in. And I thought to myself, well, that may be the only story like that.
Every day I passed, at the time it was WCGR in Baycliffe. And one day I literally just drove there and walked in and said, I'd like to work in radio. When I was a freshman in college, unannounced, the receptionist probably did not know what to do with me, so she brought the program director out, and I said, I'm a freshman over at FLCC, I'm studying communications, I want to work in this business, I want to figure it out. You guys are literally on my way to work every day. I want to work here.
That's Kelly Short. When she worked for us, she was Kelly Badger. No relation to Tom. But she walked into a radio station and asked to work there. What an interesting combination of stories that we never had the chance to document or share. But I'm very grateful that I got her to tell me that story. And I thought, oh, well, there you go. You got a little connection there. Out there. Kelly's episode, along with Gary Chapey, who spent a little bit of time with us, is our most recent episode. Going back to Dick Tobias. Yeah. You can't get the whole thing, unfortunately, because it's clipping it off. In Beverly's living room is a parrot named Cedric. Cedric was a gift to Beverly from Dick 40 years ago. And Cedric is still haranguing everybody who goes into the living room. We spent our entire time talking and sharing stories, and every now and again there's Cedric commenting and laughing at me from the side. And again, it just goes back to another one of those stories that we never got, we never shared, and it was a part of our history because of the people that made up our history. Why do I have this picture here? When I talked to Brad Couples told me an interesting story at the very end of our time together. Now, Brad spent most of his time in television in Rochester, but part-time with us in radio, and in the early part of his career, spent time in radio as a reporter. He ran a newsroom. One of the newsrooms was in White Plains, right, Brad? He was running a newsroom in White Plains, and he hired an intern. That intern, Martha Quinn. Her first job before going to MTV was in Brad Couples' newsroom. He showed her the ropes. That was the first, described as a mousy young girl just out of college. Martha Quinn would then go on to be one of the premier early VJs and now can be heard on 107.3 in the afternoons, late middays, early afternoons, on our 80s format that we have nationwide for iHeartRadio. So she is back on the air every single day. But the start is right back there.
That's very cool. Quick correction.
Yes?
She was in high school.
She was in high school.
Senior in high school.
Senior in high school. My gosh. My gosh. Maggie Brooks, seen here leaning slightly to the right. Foreshadowing.
Very good.
Tells the following story.
Coming to Rochester and WHAM was after Mike introduced himself and welcomed me on board, he said, have you ever thought of changing your name? Because my maiden name was Gribbrook. Are you ready for this? G-R-I-B-B-R-O-E-K. And it was Maggie Gribbrook. And Mike said, you know, that's a mouthful. He said, we have trouble getting people to say, you know, Jack Slattery or George April. He said, Gribbrook is going to really screw things up. I said, you know, I never have, but I said, what do you think? And he goes, I've got it, Brooks. And so it became Maggie Brooks. It became my radio persona, then my television persona, and eventually became a legal name change so that I could put it on a ballot when I was in politics.
That's the guy who gave her the name. Seen here before donning a pith helmet and going on an expedition to darkness in Peru. That is Mike Morgan, WHAM news director, from the latter 50s up until 1981-ish. And that was it, a simple choice. Your name is Margaret Gribbrook? Nope, you're Maggie Brooks. Done. And that is a story that Maggie, well, as Mike Morgan says every time they see each other, because they both live in Florida now. Mike's still going, 90 years old, still lives in Florida, sounds exactly the same today as he did all those years ago. So something as seemingly simple as that, coming in and finding an air name, that is as easy as it was for him. Caught up with Dave McKinley last year.
Always on the radio, the Bakelite radio that was up on top of the refrigerator in the kitchen. And I remember being probably 7 years old, listening to Ed Hasbrook, who did the opinion program on Wham, and a guy named David A. Sennett, who did the afternoon show, and he had these trivia questions he'd ask every day. They were called mind benders. That's what his name for it. And every day I would listen for the mind bender. And I remember when I was in second grade, I sent in, I told my mom I'd like to send in a mind bender. And she's like, well, I don't know if they do that, but sit down and write a postcard and I'll mail it for you. And sure enough, he used it, and it was a big deal to my teacher. And
there we go. There's Dave. Modeling our Ice Busters wear from 1991. Dave was a kid who loved the news, loved listening, worked at a broadcast station in Rockport, little 10-watt sucker, Rockport High School, and then wound up coming through WHAM, and I learned an awful lot by not only listening to him, but working alongside him. And his love for the place went all the way back to those days of being a kid saying, I'm going to send in a postcard to the guy I like to listen to. And that's what radio meant to so many people, is that it was a part of the community and something that was very big for them to be a part of. Let's go back here. Danny Guilfoyle. Seen here thinking about the hot dog he had, or the one he's about to. The two stories about Danny that I love. The last music show on WHAM was Danny Guilfoyle's. It was Let the Good Times Roll. On a March Saturday in 1991, it would be 2 days later that Kevin Williams would step into the front and center role on WHAM as part of our morning team, talking about the ice storm of 91. But Danny holds the distinction of playing last songs, pretty much, on WHAM on that show that weekend. And of course, record collecting is how Danny got into radio in the first place, because the jocks knew that Danny Guilfoyle had the greatest record collection known to man. If you've seen his basement, you will agree. It looks like the record archive, but far better organized. They would go to Danny to get music. And that is what brought Danny into the radio business, would eventually lead him to do a slot on the air, and that would lead to working behind the scenes, running our sales team for many, many years, being my first sales manager when I started in promotions in the mid-90s, and production director in 2001. Now, of course, I kind of blew the secret there. Hey, D, where's D? Still doing it for you? Yeah. D. Alexander, boy howdy, she had a thing with Larry King. Love Larry King. Got a chance to interview. Go back in the archive, you can hear that interview, by the way. Let's listen to what D sounded like with Jeff Howlett on her second day in the air from June 28th, 1987. Will you play? Let's try it again. Maybe we won't have any more audience. Oh, shut up. Oh, well. It was a very quiet one. I don't know why this has decided all of a sudden not to play audio anymore. Hang on. Maybe we can try something different. Don't know if they have it on my phone. Anyway, it would have been great. So we'll hurry this along. National Wet Basement Day was the topic of discussion that morning, as I recall. And what we had is a gentleman by the name of Bill Dulmich, and he lives in Canada. And he has been, since 1965, randomly air checking WHAM, and he sent me all of this sound that he'd been collecting over the years. And it goes back to the breadth that this station had the ability to broadcast to at 50,000 watts, how far it could be heard, and that it served communities that were not just here. And it served fans of radio who were not just here. And God love Bill and a bunch of other people who would randomly record newscasts on holidays, put them on reel-to-reel tapes, and then send them in to us so we could have them for part of our archive. This was an interesting one, and you can see the 45. It's in the back. I uncovered this recently, and I didn't even know it existed. Yep, with the Dave Carroll Orchestra, Melody of Love, and narration by Mort Nussbaum. Now, Mort was on the air with us. He started his radio career in the late 1930s. And Mort was a fascinating cat. I wish that I had the opportunity to interview him. He was a broadcaster. He was a Broadway actor. He had an off-stage role in an off-Broadway show about soldiers in World War I. And he would be in the orchestra pit and throw dirt up on stage. That was his job. Coincidentally, his friend Ed Musicus also had designs on being a Broadway actor. Ed went to New York and attempted to audition for Broadway shows, thought he was going to do that, but got back to Rochester before getting a chance to do any of that work and wound up being on the air. So I didn't realize, number one, that he had done this, and number two, he's one of those people from that era who has a name that you wouldn't necessarily expect to have been allowed on the air, but he never changed his name. Throughout the entire time he was on the air, he was Mort Nussbaum. And I just have to wonder what he went through in those eras, especially during the 30s and 40s, with a guy with that name. But he also wound up having a great second act to the career. If Doug Edlich was still here, he had a meeting with his second act in the financial world. That's where Mort wound up. Wound up in the financial world after that. We have other memorable moments, of course. We have the ice storm of '91. We have the coverage led by Alan Harris, who was on most days and nights. A gentleman who we lost earlier this year, Jack Mindy, who spent a few years with us. Jack was on the air that morning and led our coverage. We have some outstanding women who have been in our newsroom, not only Joan Randberg, who is here today, Beverly Morgan, who is here today, Sherry Smith, who could not be with us today, Kelly Short, then Kelly Badger, Jennifer Witten, Sheila McGrath, lots of other people, and we've had outstanding women who have been through our newsroom. And of course, we've remembered those who are not here with us. Kevin Meath would love this, by the way. Yeah. Kevin Meath would have just eaten this 100th anniversary up like crazy. And it's the one person that I know definitely would have really gotten behind this. Of course, Nick Nixon has passed. Brian McDonald, the closest thing to Ernest Hemingway that I would have ever met in this life. Walter Dixon, and that wonderful voice that he had. Gene Menton from our sales department. Brad Smith, as Danny mentioned at the top, who passed away suddenly in the end of November. And of course, now I have to get to one last thing. One last thing. Oh. Our news department.
Oh, nice.
Brendan O'Riordan, Bill Lau, who's in Las Vegas at a big air show. Randy Boardman, who is the WXXI. Sherry Smith here. This, I don't know who this is, but a friend of mine sent this in. Picture of the old Sagamore Studios. I would love to have that mic. Yeah. Man, would I love to have that mic. Dan Minchin is back there. One of the Green Thumb program hosts with Doc and Katie Abraham. This is the bunker of 350 East Avenue, or one of the bunkers of 350 East Avenue.
Production studio.
It's
that was the bomb shelter.
It was the bomb shelter?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Last thing I'm going to bring up here. Why do I bring up the radio service bulletin of August 1st, 1922? Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to debunk a long-held myth of WHAM. Now, the story goes, as I have heard it, that George Eastman waved his magic wand and said, WHAM, because I like naming things, and poof, there we were. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not the case. Let us scroll down to the new station assignments, shall we? Tell me where it starts with WHAG, and follow the list sequentially through WHAZ. We got lucky. We could have been WHAT or WHAZ. Look at the letters we could have. And yet, WHAM, licensed to the University of Rochester in Rochester, New York, got great luck of the draw. Now, could George Eastman have slipped someone a couple of bucks when it came to where we fell in that list? Maybe, maybe. But that's the reality of the story. You can keep telling the story if you like, but just know we could have been whack. And think about how that was received. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much. The series is Wham at 100 in Oral History. It's on the iHeartRadio app or at iHeart.com. It will live there forever, I hope. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out or want to go back, like I said, we have about 100 episodes right now. A lot more stories to share, people you may have known or worked with. So I thank you for checking it out, and go back and take another listen. Okay, so you best. Oh, and Joni, sorry you got replaced by the bozo.
Oh, thank you.
Another round of applause, Joe Lomonaco. I hope you like this format. Last year, as you know, we passed the mic around as we were here till 4:30. This is a little easier, but it was a great program, and we thank you for all the information you shared. I'm tempted to call on Kevin to give us a weather forecast update here.
Chance of snow.
Chance of snow.
It's the Williams weather window. Visual radar. Very nice.
The name has been shared, and I probably have shared this story before, but for those who have not heard it, I was giving a speech once at the old Spring House, and Walter Dixon was in the audience. Walter, and I had to come after the 6 o'clock news, so they were a little delayed in their program. And he was at the bar on the lower level, remember the bar, before he went up to the Spring House. And I'm giving my speech, and Walter is sitting there, and this when he's smoking a little cigar. And halfway through my speech, he keels over, lands on the cigar, burns a hole in his coat. They call the ambulance and take him away. I asked what I should do with the Audiovisual Society of Rochester. They said, well, finish your speech. So I finished my speech, and I went home, and the next morning, I'm very concerned. I had Walter's phone number. So I called his home to see if I could talk to someone there to see how he's doing. Walter answers the phone. I said, Walter, are you okay? Is anything wrong? He goes, Don, the Spring House makes the biggest martinis in town. Have a great day.